All right, welcome everybody. So today we're going to be talking about regulating hormonal balancing things. But first, we're going to start with our simultaneous squeeze. So if you will, we'll take a big deep breath in like that. Then take a sip of air, an Andrew Huberman sip of air to really fill your lungs in. Then you're going to hold that breath in really tight. Oh, like this, like you're bearing down, like you're going to poop. Maybe. And then you're going to hold that for 5 seconds. Then you're going to slowly exhale very slowly. And this is going to stimulate your vagus nerve very easily, very, very systematically. Okay, so ready? Here we go. In 3, 2, 1, breathe in. Sip of air at the top. Hold and squeeze. And then slowly exhale. Very good. All right, so you might feel something tangibly shifted in your body. That's an indication of a vagal shift, okay? Very cool. I mean, who would have known that something as simple as breathing could actually activate your vagus nerve? I mean, I think that's pretty cool. All right, so let's crack into it. Boom. All right, so today we're going to be talking about the interrelationship between your vagus nerve and your hormones. Big reason why this is an important video is because, as we've seen repeatedly, what I've told people time and time again is that with age, simply just adding years on the clock will make your vagus nerve weaker and weaker and weaker. By default, your vagus nerve gets less strong, less toned with age. And that's true with anything, right? You lose muscle tone, you lose skin tightness, you lose mental sharpness, and you lose vagal tone. So don't take all of these as a given that they're going to be with you forever. Vagus nerve is one of those things that probably is worth investing some time and some effort into learning. Otherwise, hey, unless you want to be that huddled over, bad posture person who's at the shopping center, barely functioning, if you want to avoid that, then probably vagus nerve stuff is going to help you avoid that. All the big celebrities, all the big peak performers in the world, they're all stimulating their vagus nerve. All the big wigs out there who are like wanting to stay alive forever, they're all stimulating their vagus nerves. So that should tell you something. All the high performers are doing it too. So let's crack into this in terms of hormonal balance. So as we know, the body is a very complex and interconnected set of systems. When they work together, they maintain homeostasis. Homeostasis is very important. One key aspect of achieving this balance is, of course, the health of your vagus nerve. In recent years, researchers have discovered the profound influence that the vagus nerve itself plays on hormonal regulation and overall well-being. So in this video, we're going to delve into the fascinating connection between the vagus nerve and your hormones. So if you're going into a clinic and you're getting hormone replacement therapy, that might be an indication that endogenous hormones being put into your body may be supplanting the work that you could naturally do with your vagus nerve. Something to consider. I mean, you could also save yourself a lot of money too if you started work on your vagus nerve first and then went to a hormone replacement clinic. So all kinds of options for you. But let's talk about the most important thing that relates. How does your vagus nerve interact with your hormones? It's called acetylcholine. And acetylcholine is what is considered a neurotransmitter that also has a dual function as what's called a paracrine stimulating or signaling hormone. So your vagus nerve itself, by the nature of it releasing acetylcholine, acts as a gland. So your vagus nerve is in a way of a nerve, but it's also a glandular organ in your body. It's the longest nerve in your entire body, the 10th cranial nerve. So before we dive into the specifics, let's talk a little bit about acetylcholine. So acetylcholine is a neurotransmitter that was discovered after people who were doing anatomy on the body could stimulate the vagus nerve. And when they electrically stimulated the vagus nerve, I'm talking like in the year 1835, so a long time ago, they had little batteries and they could stimulate nerves in a cadaverous body. And when they stimulated the vagus nerve, it would start crying, basically. Like when you stimulate the vagus nerve, it starts seeping out this clear fluid, so to speak, like tears. And they called that stuff, they called it vagus stuff. That's what they called it. And it turns out that vagus stuff is pretty much pure acetylcholine being released into the environment. Now, when that vagus stuff is produced close to your thymus, for instance, or down in your ovaries, it regulates the production of hormones like estrogen, testosterone, T3, T4, like thyroid hormones as well, can be controlled by the vagus nerve. Lori, she wrote, just got back from Cairo, wanted me to do a 500 hormone test. Yeah, so hormone testing could be certainly a relatively good option. Certainly, I mean, I don't think there's anything wrong with that. So that's interesting. Acetylcholine is a paracrine stimulating hormone that can activate different glandular function throughout your entire body. So if your vagus nerve isn't working, then the glands aren't producing the hormones that they're supposed to. Then you get a deficit in hormones. And that could be thyroid hormones can be depleted because could it be that is the human body in deficit of a pharmaceutical drug? Or is it in a deficit of natural biological machinery that happens in the body? Like neurological signaling could be not working properly, and that is the issue, right? It reminds me of the joke, what was it? This guy gets pulled over by a police officer, and he said there's not enough blood in my alcohol stream. It's kind of like this concept of like we're mixing and matching the root cause of hormonal issues. It's not that your thyroid numbers aren't bad because you're lacking the T3 pills that your doctor is going to prescribe you. It's likely that your thyroid itself is lacking the stimulatory input to produce the thyroid naturally. What we know so far, if you've been on any more than 3 of my live videos, you'll probably start to take the hint that the vagus nerve, as we get older and we develop chronic illness, tends to break down pretty quickly. And if it's true that vagus nerve dysfunction can cause a whole bunch of other issues like autoimmunity and makes you more at risk for inflammation, then how difficult is it to jump from that to say, hey, maybe my hormone imbalance could also be a result of the lack of vagus nerve activity? It's very well established that the vagus nerve does regulate glandular function. So this isn't that far out of medical research to look at the vagus nerve as a crucial part of the hormone system. Acetylcholine is the neurotransmitter that your vagus nerve produces, and acetylcholine regulates other various bodily functions such as your heart rate, your digestion, as well as your immune response and your glandular function, right? So if you have a breakdown of your vagus nerve, you have heart issues, you have digestion issues, you have immune issues, and you have hormone issues as well. So what can you do in that case? You're like, okay, well, clearly there's something wrong with the vagus nerve. What should I do in response to that? That would come down to something that is in line with toning the vagus nerve. You've probably read already on the internet about how to tone the vagus nerve. And by toning the vagus nerve, we can help maintain hormonal balance at all ages, especially as we get older. Hormonal imbalances can be very obviously bad. They can really affect our quality of life. So that's really a challenge. So the vagus nerve being part of your parasympathetic system is also. Oh, hey, Jessa, good to see you. I'll read your message in a little bit. But the vagus nerve is part of your parasympathetic system, also known as the rest and digest system. This is the branch of your autonomic nervous system that's responsible for promoting relaxation, reducing stress, and supporting optimal physiological functioning. So if you're naturally unable to relax, that might mean you're naturally unable to activate your vagus nerve. That's more what that is. So by stimulating the vagus nerve, we can activate the parasympathetic response, which leads to a cascade of positive effects on hormonal health. New studies have shown that vagus nerve stimulation can enhance the production and release of hormones, helping to regulate mood, metabolism, and reproductive functions. So there are certain hormones that are in your pancreas that get released when you stimulate your vagus nerve. For instance, they've recently shown that if you stimulate your pancreas with focused pulsed ultrasound, that you can fix and cure type 2 diabetes with a single treatment. And the target is the vagus nerve as it goes to the pancreas. So that literally fixes what is a life-threatening, debilitating illness. Type 2 diabetes is not fun. So by stimulating the vagus nerve, you fix other issues that wouldn't typically be classified, right? Who until right now has told you that fact, right? Now, even if you are a type 2 diabetic, I highly doubt, I would bet money, unless you have a really good doctor, but I would bet money, I would put money on it now that your doctor, if you have type 2 diabetes, didn't classify type 2 diabetes as a vagus nerve oriented issue rather than a you're eating too much sugar issue. That the vagus nerve, the way they look at your body is that they don't see the vagus nerve as being part of this almost in any way, shape, or form. That's a problem because that means that there's really no solution in that case. The way that you look at a body, the way that you look at problems can determine what kind of solutions are available to you in that model. So if we know that the vagus nerve does regulate hormones, now what are some things that can be done? So toning the vagus nerve is an all-inclusive term to include things that stimulate your vagus nerve. Toning can be stimulating with handheld devices, can be breathing, humming, gargling, meditating, whatever, right? Anything that, you Google it, you find a mommy blog, and she's like, these are the top 10 natural tips for stimulating my vagus nerve. I like to stick ice cold popsicles down my throat until I start gagging. And that's a great way to tone my vagus nerve. It's called they'll call it the push-ups for the vagus nerve when you gag. So anywhere you look, you'll find some natural ways to stimulate your vagus nerve, for sure. So that's good to know. All right, so next up here, I want to put little timestamps on this. So the biggest indicator for this is where I've seen this work so well. And obviously, look, if you have like hormonal imbalance and it's like minorly discomforting, then probably the mommy blog stuff is going to be fine. Okay. But you do realize that there are classifications of hormonal imbalance in cases of menopause that can be so psychologically and physiologically debilitating that it's almost difficult to get through the day, through the week, through the month. So I have one particular client in mind. Her name is Shannon, and she came to me with reports of every 28 days when her cycle would naturally happen. She's in her late 40s, and she's premenopause, but when she was younger, she didn't have these issues. But now getting into the menopause years, she would get deathly ill. She would start vomiting. She had to check into the ER. This is for years and years and years before she ever found me, before she ever found the vagus nerve stimulation repair program. This had been a severe issue. And she's like, I traveled to Canada. She said she traveled to Canada to get domperidone treatment, which is an anti-nausea, antiemetic, which is like banned in the United States apparently. She takes tons of anti-nausea pills. She's on tons of medication, but yet none of those things really have fixed the issue. And she was really tired of constantly having to go back to like managing the condition. She's like, can I be free of the debilitating pre-menopause symptoms of like being deathly ill, like fluid wants to shoot out of all of the orifices of the body during that menopause, that monthly cycle every 28 days. And so she came to me. We hypothesized a plan. We got on a call. Before she ever signed up, I got on a call, a strategy call. We talked for about an hour, and I got a clear-cut vision of what are the actual symptoms that you're dealing with right now. What are the actual problems? And based on what she told me, given that it was nausea, insomnia, digestive disorder, dizziness, all of these were symptoms that are telltale signatures of vagus nerve dysfunction. So I saw these as, these are vagal nerve in nature. So naturally what we want to do is get the vagus nerve to work and regulate the vagus nerve more properly. Now, some people who are, like, I think if you're thinking about this too basically, I would encourage you not to do that, because you might think, well, Sterling, if she was vomiting, if she was nauseous, that's an indication of vagus nerve activity. So if somebody's vomiting, then wouldn't you not want to stimulate the vagus nerve? And the answer is that vomiting doesn't represent a 100% activity of the vagus nerve all the time. Vomiting typically only comes when the vagus nerve is constantly downregulated for hours and hours and hours too long, and then it spikes really quickly, and then it spikes back down. There's no system in the world that goes from 10 to 100 and then back to 10 within the span of 20 minutes that's healthy, right? It'd be like if my car, if I'm driving on the freeway at 50 miles per hour, and then the engine, the red light, the tachyometer, the one that shows you how many RPMs, let's say it's at 4,000 RPMs, and then it goes like that to 10,000, and then like that. That is not, you wouldn't look at that and say, oh, well, because it had a spike, it means your engine's overactive, and we need to do everything to get it down. That means there's something fundamentally deeper that's wrong with it that needs to get resolved. What you would do is want to regulate the activity of that engine. That's what nausea is. It's not that your vagus nerve is constantly overstimulated. It's really that your vagus nerve is non-regulated. So stimulating your vagus nerve in the way that we do it is more toning the vagus nerve to have more regular, optimal medial activity. Make sense? So what we determined there on that call was that we would want to stimulate her vagus nerve for a period of time to try and manage and mitigate the symptoms of her premenopausal severe nausea, which would last for typically 3 days, would be so severe that she would have to go to the emergency room for 2 days in a row, get IV, get fluids, have medication, the whole meal deal. Not very pleasant. And this would just happen every single month. Now, I'm proud to say that the hypothesis that we laid out, which would be to stimulate and regulate her vagus nerve activity more properly, worked. And now in the end, after a 3-month course of doing VNS, she never once had to go to the hospital ever again, never experienced nausea ever again. Her cycle went back to completely normal and regulated based on the treatments that we pursued by stimulating her vagus nerve. Okay, so that is an example of what toning the vagus nerve can do for severe menopause. Now, I know that some of you watching may have experienced something like that in the past, or maybe you know someone who's currently going through this right now. So what I would love to invite you to do is, if you do ever hear of a girlfriend or a loved one or somebody in your circle who is having like some pretty nasty menopause symptoms, to send them our way. Invite them into the Facebook group and encourage them to schedule a call with me, because we can work through some of these issues. If it's premenopausal or even postmenopause, can have some issues. I think, I'm not sure if they're here in the group or in the chat here. We've actually had some younger women in their mid 40s who had experienced menopause way too early when they shouldn't have. They're like, they were like 43 years old. We had a woman from Australia who was 43, and she went through all menopause, and she had no more, never bled ever again. She never had her period. It just was gone. And this was abnormal. She thought she would never be able to have children. She thought it was just bad. And also she lost a ton of weight through that process. And so she eventually did come our way. She had actually, I believe, heard the story of the last client that we had done some work on with menopause. And so we started stimulating her vagus nerve, and her periods started to come back. And they weren't painful or anything like that. It was what she wanted. She ultimately, I believe there's a period in time where it's too early to have menopause, because generally speaking, from my understanding, is that once your body goes through menopause and you're postmenopausal, that's when you start to develop risks of osteoporosis, and you need to go on hormone replacement therapy. So she was very close to having to go on HRT, but like full scale HRT, like full on management of hormones externally, endogenously, which wouldn't have been good at her age. So, think of whatever you will, right? I'm sure there's plenty of reasons for some watching to judge this and say, well, there's no way that had anything to do with the vagus nerve or anything like that. But these are just a few examples of, real clear-cut cases where it was a menopause issue. We looked at a hypothesis, we evaluated and we stimulated, and we saw on the tail end of that the results we were expecting. Exogenously, yeah, exactly. Thank you, Jessa. You're the best. So yeah, as far as dealing with menopause, absolutely toning your vagus nerve is super, super important. So anyway, certain handheld vagus nerve stimulator platforms can have very promising results in alleviating some of the symptoms of discomfort associated with this particular transitional stage in life. So something to consider. But yes, again, if you know someone in your life who is struggling with menopause and it's very painful, please do them a huge favor and get them in the Facebook group, get them reading, get them to schedule a call with somebody on our team or myself personally. We would love to have that conversation. And for the most part, all of our consultation calls are completely free. So there's nothing asked in return. We just do these to help people. So anyway, in conclusion, so as we've seen, the vagus nerve is a very powerful regulator of hormonal balance. It does stimulate and regulate hormones through the paracrine signaling system. When your vagus nerve gets stimulated, it releases acetylcholine, which then stimulates glandular function throughout all parts of your body, including your thyroid and your female hormone centers. So, estrogen, progesterone, those can get normalized through vagus nerve stimulation itself. And you can stimulate through the neck and get effects down there too. So that's pretty cool. But yeah, so by toning the vagus nerve, we can strive to maintain hormonal equilibrium at all stages of life. So that's really good. And yeah, so there's a lot of promise in this field. If there are hormonal issues, then this should be evaluated. Now, it's essential to, I guess, continue to explore potential connections between the vagus nerve, hormonal balance, and overall health, and to help people and empower them to achieve optimal well-being. So thanks so much. That will do it for the lesson of the day. I do see we had some questions here in the chat. If you do have any questions, of course, now is the best time to type them in the chat so I don't miss them. Jessa, not sure if you wanted me to read this. It does look like a question. Let's see. I'll just read the end. It's about low-dose naltrexone on the 8th week. Oh, okay. Some side effects with hormones. Had to stop using BHRT. Okay. LDN as immune and endocrine modulator. Thoughts? Let me think. So I know low-dose naltrexone is kind of like a pain reliever for the most part. It does deal with a lot of, generalized bodily pain. Let's see. So let's think this through. So if your LDN, let me just look here. I've actually had a lot of clients who use this for fibromyalgia and different kinds of pain related things in their neck, but not as am I getting this right that you're using low dose naltrexone? Okay, so for dysautonomia, so not for hormone stuff, but it had effects in your hormone issues. Let's see. So I'm going to look at it as a low-dose naltrexone as a parasympathomimetic. Yeah, so it does influence immunomodulation. It's likely affecting the brainstem and not the vagus nerve, but the part of the brainstem where the vagus nerve goes into. I believe that's where the mu-opioid receptors are going to be located to block pain signals from the body. So it does interrupt inflammation. Cool. Thanks, guys, for working through this with me. So what I want to also look for is if low-dose naltrexone is an acetylcholinergic inhibitor. So how does it affect? Remember, because we talked about acetylcholine is really important for regulation of this important paracrine hormone that the vagus nerve releases. And a lot of drugs like Benadryl, for instance, can block some of the acetylcholinergic functions. That's what can make you pass out because you deplete it in your brain. So ACHE inhibitor. Okay, so it doesn't seem to interact with acetylcholine. That's good. Yeah, it's the mu receptor. Yeah, I'm not sure what exact interaction it has with that. If you'd be cool messaging me, I'd love to keep on looking at it for sure a little bit further. But generally I would say The hormone upset is unfortunate. I mean, you probably still have your ultrasound, might be good. Well, like I said, send me a message. Let's work out, let's talk about it a little bit. We can look at some options. Happy to help. Um, hmm. Yeah, that's a weird thing, but definitely, definitely. Okay, okay. Blocks the opioid receptors, and then they come on bigger afterwards. Okay, so wow, yeah, huh, yeah, you're right. I see your messages here. Major anti-inflammatory. So the piece I do know that might help unlock this a little bit is, generally speaking, when your body is free of inflammation, your vagus nerve gets to have fun in the body. But as soon as there's inflammation somewhere in the body, like that's being indicated, your vagus nerve kind of like stops having fun, puts on its serious hat, puts on its sunglasses, and goes to work attacking the problem. And that can remove some of the free acetylcholine that's sent to other parts of the body. So I could see how, if the LDN was artificially indicating some, I don't know. I mean, it's technically anti-inflammatory, but I suspect it's more complex than that. Um, so, but yeah, it'd be like for instance, if you normally have a really healthy vagus nerve, but you got an infection, you would see something like your heart rate variability, which is a general measurement of your vagus nerve. You'd see the HRV collapse pretty quickly. It doesn't mean that your vagus nerve got damaged. It just means that it's like considered busy. It's putting like the live call, do not disturb, on the door. So it's not available to regulate stress. It's really trying to fight like a pretty severe battle. So if something like that is happening, that's where my estimation would be that some of these challenges are coming from. That'd be my best, off the top of my head, guess, that it's a lot more complicated than it seems at first, right? Again, it's always a lot easier to say, well, LDN helps with pain. That's it. Just like antidepressants help with depression, even though that's far from the truth. First of all, they don't really typically help with depression, and the effects that they have are far more wide-ranging than dealing with serotonin. So, but I absolutely know that LDN low dose naltrexone has been very helpful for a lot of chronic pain conditions. So, yeah, anyway, I think let's definitely chat a little bit more. Your HRV sucks. You're always complicated. Nah, you're great. You're fine. You'll do good. You've got a good heart. It'll work out for you. I think I kind of believe in that karma stuff. So you're good. We'll get you sorted out, Jessa. You're like a super long-term friend and believer in the vagus nerve world. So I'll help you out. No biggie. I saw one other question. Jada asked, I was told never to use ultrasound near the carotid artery. What say you? Yeah, so high intensity ultrasound used in different parts of the body can dislodge, like plaques and stuff that can then go into the brain. So yeah, absolutely, Jada. This is a huge reason why I really hate it when people are like, oh, Sterling said ultrasound. I can just go get one off eBay for whatever. And like, this could kill you. I mean, we're not playing around with toys here, right? So you got to take this stuff very seriously. The intensity, the location, the placement. I have 12 plus years of clinical grade experience of doing ultrasound stimulation of the brain and the body. I have hardcore regulatory experience in the use of ultrasound. So, yes, I do take this seriously. And you're right. There are parts of your body where you should not be putting ultrasound, especially at different intensities. So, yeah, it's a great question. Again, that's why, again, I do really get pissed off when people are just like, what would this guy Sterling know? I mean, he's only worked with like the biggest clinics using ultrasound. He's only developed ultrasound for basically since he was 18 years old. When I was 18, I developed ultrasound systems in college. I've been using ultrasound on the human body since I was 21 years old in college. Some of my colleagues now run like multi $100 million companies that are doing brain stimulation with ultrasound. I facilitated some of the biggest VC ultrasound deals in the world. I currently work on treatments for ultrasound. So I definitely know what's up. So yeah, it's a great question, Jada. I take it very seriously, and it's really unfortunate that people are just like, what's the worst that could happen? I'm like, a lot could happen actually. But for the most part, I think if you did put ultrasound on your carotid artery, it's not your carotid artery, actually, it's your carotid sinus artery, and that has a blood pressure receptor, so you just might pass out. That's basically what would happen for the most part. Cool. Chris, you wrote, interesting thing to share. My HRV has always been fairly good, but it's higher with having COVID right now. So yeah, so Chris, that's an interesting observation. Certain HRV, I would ask, I would be curious, like, what device are you particularly using to measure your HRV? Sometimes if your beats, so with COVID, what we've seen is people do have like SVT or PVT, so skipped heartbeats, just erratic heart rate, that these HRV devices aren't really built to filter out all the time, especially if they're very chronic. So if you skip beats, then that looks like an increase in heart rate variability, right? Because it'd be like, this is what low HRV sounds like, variation. So it's like, okay, Heartify app. Okay, good. So that's probably using your fingertip, which is an okay place to measure. My guess would be something with that. But again, the other thing is heart rate variability. It's not people think of it as this like 100%. This exactly measures your vagus nerve. It doesn't measure your vagus nerve to 100%. There are a lot of other factors that go into it. So it's a good overall measurement. And, again, we don't fully, this is probably going to get me canceled. I should probably go, okay, I'm going to go off live on YouTube before I say the next thing. So thanks guys on YouTube for watching, and thanks Twitter.